Timeline. We've developed through our research a more detailed timeline, which now approaches 80 pages. We won't. We don't have time for that today, but
I do have it with me if you want to look at it.
yeah. But here is some sort of highlights
In
along
red
the
are
way.
some of the bands that he was in.
Right, I mean,
History.
we should note, Mr. Charlie was also known as just simply Mr. Charlie as well, but they started out as the Mr. Charlie Blues Band in reference to the Lightning Hopkins song, but also to the reference of what a white man was usually called down south, other than a cracker. But this is, what we should mention is that 5th edition and Mr. Charlie did play gigs, but they were playing teen centers. They're playing like the Bayway and Bay Village, Our Place, and Rocky River. They're playing Bay High School. There are some incredibly side-splitting stories about Mr. Charlie playing private parties for their parents as friends and getting shut off not once, not twice, but 3 times, getting paid to leave. Partly one time because they did an endless version of Miss Sister Ray by the Velvet Underground that ended in feedback. Another time because Peter's first original song that they played was a song called I'm So Fucked Up. And a story that Don Harvey, the bass player of Mr. Charlie, told me real quick. They were playing a private party for some old folks, and Peter says, this one's called I'm So Fucked Up. And as they were playing it, the woman comes over to unplug his amp. Apparently, according to Don, Peter says, you touch my amp, I'll fucking kill you. And this is a kid. I mean, he's a kid. He's 16 years old when he says this. But already, there you go.
So, I want to point out a couple things here. In November 1969, understand that Peter in his lifetime released very few official recordings on record. November 1969 is the very first one. It's the only LP recording that he ever released officially.
And that's private press.
The name of the LP is Notes on a Cocktail Napkin. It came in a plain white sleeve. I think there's 100 copies.
No, 30.
30 copies.
Remember, we had the receipt?
Yes, and we
Terry
do,
has the receipt.
we do possess one copy in our archives. It took some searching to get it, but we do have one.
Basically, Peter and Terry decided to record Terry's songs before Terry went to Vietnam.
He was
Yes.
drafted. And the other thing was is Peter did not inform the guys in Mr. Charlie that he was doing this. So Don Harvey didn't find out about that record until 30 years later when he met Terry Hartman. But this is a pattern that starts. Peter lived a lot of parallel lives that did not intersect.
So another thing I'd like to point out is this April to August 1971 trip to San Francisco that Peter made. There's been, when we got into this project, there was a lot of speculation about that trip, about what really happened. What interests me about this trip is that, first of all, we were able to find someone who Peter went with. His name is Rockne Riddlebarger, and Rockne provided us with numerous photos and details about the trip. But what's most interesting to me is answering how Peter found out that you could go to San Francisco, you could go to the Bay Area, you could play open mic sessions and get paid in food and drinks and somehow survive. And of course, this is obviously a pre-internet age where information flows very slowly, and we've been trying to answer how it is that that information came to Cleveland, came to Peter. We theorized that it was probably hippie bands on tour and that the news spread around and there was just something that was in the air and that they picked up on it and said, what the heck, let's do it. We haven't confirmed that yet. That's our leading theory.
I mean, probably some of you have heard of Glenn Schwartz, who was a Cleveland guitar player, who was originally in the James Gang, Mr. Stress Blues Band. He joined Pacific Gas and Electric, were a Bay Area band, and then he eventually came back. But Glenn was regarded as a hero of sorts, and I'm sure that, you know, Peter talked to bands, whether that he went to go see, and he saw a lot of bands at a legendary club called Le Cave. And, you know, I think much like also with New York, which he was also visiting before this, the word filters out. People also probably burned out hippies coming back from the Summer of Love going, oh, that's cool out there. It's not like here. And that's kind of what he was looking for with a change of pace, but didn't work.
And that sort of flow of information in a pre-internet time is something that we're seriously interested in and trying to find out these clues and figure out how these things happened. And so that's one little mystery that we've been working on. There's one last thing I'd like to point out in this slide. August 16th, 1971, Peter and Charlotte get married in Michigan, and I personally think that's the start of the Black Orchid Society, basically when they got married.
Pretty much, yeah.
And
Then he goes to
There it is.
professional career.
After Peter married
Stress,
Charlotte,
Mr.
his
Earl
sort of
Baxter.
professional career started. There's numerous bands that he was in. In September 1974, he joins Rocket from the Tombs. I also wish to point out, September 1974, Peter and Charlotte moved into the Plaza, which was apartment building on East 23rd in Cleveland. It was home to numerous
No,
Prospect.
it was on
Prospect at East 23rd.
They were previously living in East 23rd.
36 Prospect. Yeah.
36 in Prospect, sorry. My undergraduate degree's in English, so my math and number skills aren't as good. The Plaza was a focal point of what was happening in Cleveland all throughout the 70s. It was an apartment building that Alan Ravenstein from Per Ubu owned. He provided a sort of home and cheap or free rent to a number of artists. It was a very sort of densely populated place, but it also was a place, it was sort of an idea incubator, and it was a place that there were numerous jams going on any given day. There was a wide variety of types of artists there. There were writers, not only musicians, but writers, visual artists, photographers,
But there were also
you name it.
a lot of regular people. I mean, Albert Dennis, who was the bass player in Cinderella Backstreet, and Peter's band Wolves, also pointed out, because he lived at the Plaza with, there were a lot of regular people who lived at the Plaza too, and he says that made it all the more interesting. He said, Albert's got a very distinct voice. He goes, there were students living there who probably shouldn't have been there, but they became a part of it too. And but that's, again, it's not like, you might get an image of like a commune or for, like the Talking Heads said, for artists only, but it wasn't so much that. It was more sort of them existing, again, as David said, they were urban pioneers and existing in the urban landscape of Cleveland. Eventually we'll be releasing an interview we did with Cynthia Black, who was in Cinderella Backstreet, in which she gets into great detail about how if Alan and David Bloomquist had not bought the building and given them a place to live, they would have been homeless because they were all broke, because they were musicians.
And Prospect was also a pretty derelict place. The streetwalkers and bums on the
And pimps.
street were pimps and were hanging out there. Star, Zeppelin, Exit were various local weekly, bi-weekly papers that came out, and Peter wrote for all of them, as did Charlotte under the name Stella Rayon. And Peter even got in Plain Dealer one day.
It's not mentioned here, but Scene Magazine was a large, well-known,
That's where
free
David
weekly.
wrote, yeah.
David Thomas wrote there, but
We'll get into it more later because we got slides on that.
yes. This slide shows a continuation of Peter's
Yes.
professional career. In 1975, he started writing for Cream. It was the first large nationally distributed outlet for him. He published numerous articles there. He was a contemporary of Lester Bangs. They were friends. They recorded together. And that was sort of his big break into rock and roll journalism. Peter at that time also had a number of poems, as did Charlotte, published in the Cleveland Anthology, of which there are
Show that
2
later.
volumes.
Yeah.
But in December 1975, he separates from Charlotte. He goes, Rocket from the Tombs sort of disintegrates.
Terribly,
He goes on to other bands.
Peter and the Wolves, Friction and Wolves were basically the last set of bands. Peter and the Wolves was sort of an offshoot of Peru that existed for a couple months.
Yeah.
Peter and Charlotte eventually divorced in August 1976, and they sort of celebrated their divorce with doing a poetry reading,
Called amicable divorce.
of which we have a copy of. Peter, at that time, also entered a contest in Punk Magazine, another nationally distributed magazine, for which he also wrote. He came in second place in that contest.
And the prize, fortunately, was reprinting the contest responses from that questionnaire.
Eventually, he formed some other bands, Friction and Wolves. They're short-lived. He moves back into his parents' house, sort of in the throes of addiction, and unfortunately dies of acute pancreatitis in 1977. After his death, of course, there's been
Some of the releases of the music that have come out here and there.
there's been, we don't list here all the articles that have appeared, but there's been numerous articles, numerous records,
Yeah.
many of which are essentially bootlegs.
Well, that
Sort,
Take the Guitar
semi.
Player for a Ride was the album on Jimmy Care Records in 1994. Couple compilations with Perubu with the first two singles on it he was in. The Shape of Things is a live set from Perubu in April '76. And of course, The Day the Earth Met Rocket from the Tunes was the CD release of the key Rocket from the Tunes songs. So I think that's about
One other thing one other thing about Peter, one other comment that I'll make is that his songs are more well known when performed by others, it seems, than by him, although certainly some of the things that we've uncovered would probably change that opinion. But this is just a short list of bands that have performed his music after his death. I should point out Ain't It Fun by Guns N' Roses. That's Peter's song. It contains, Peter famously wrote in that song, Ain't it fun when you know you're going to die young, which he did. But as you can see, there's been a number of fairly large and influential bands who have performed his music, and there's been also a number of tributes in writing, as I had mentioned. I think the best of which is at the top of the list there, Those Were Different Times, a series of essays by Charlotte Pressler that appeared in Clee magazine.
That was her. Yeah, she published part one of a memoir and has not gotten to complete the other two parts. So it covers up through about the end of '72 roughly.
His obituary was written by Lester Bangs.
Psychotic Reactions of Carburetor Dung.
Yes.
I think a number of these are in the list of references that's been handed out.
Richard Hell, who was friends. I think it was more than just acquaintances with Peter, although they had a very sort of tumultuous relationship. Wrote about Peter in his book, and the most recently published account is Adele Bertai's small press Peter and the Wolves self-published book that is really, I think, well done. And if you could find a copy, certainly that's something that you'd want to read.
Adele was the singer in Wolves, the second Wolves, the later Wolves, the '77 Wolves. But she and Peter also had a one-shot band called Cleveland Blues Underground. And Adele later moved to New York, and she joined James Chance and the Contortions, and her career sort of exploded from there. And she's still active today.
So I think we've given you the 10,000-foot view of Peter. Let's give you the 10,000-foot view of Charlotte Pressler. And Nick, Andrew?
And
Well, first thing we find out about Charlotte at 15 years of age, she's planning to start a Mensa chapter locally. And there's a short story with her and her friend who are going to start this chapter, written by Jane Scott, the famous journalist. And then she graduates Rocky River High, age 16, goes to Bennington College for a little bit, stays in Boston. Met Peter in 1969, and from there they kind of got married. She was doing some writing and stuff alongside Peter in the underground papers. The Love You Poems was inspired by the Syd Barrett song, and she published that as a chapbook in 1976 through Falling Down Press operated by Alan Horvath. After Peter's death, she went on, she recorded a 7-inch single with, I guess it's the Morgan Brothers, it's Prester
Pat
Morgan.
and Doug Morgan, and that group also recorded a lot more material that never got released that we've
Right.
recently been granted
But
access
that single's on Hayarpin Records, which is David Thomas's label. And she also recorded a single with the Styrenes called True Confessions, and co-edited the second Cleveland anthology in 1983. Next slide.
Yeah, I think Peter has some things published in that as well as Charlotte.
And Red Dark Sweet was a band she formed with her second husband, Andrew Klimek, and Frank Kogan, another rock critic. Then she got a degree in philosophy and was in a group called the Backyard Mechanics for Language. Became fiction editor for Cleveland Ragnarok. Got a PhD in medieval studies at the University of Buffalo, graduated in 2002. And eventually joined the faculty in Southern Florida Community College.
Fortunately, many of her papers were left with the University of Buffalo. And we were able to access those as part of our research, and they were incredibly insightful and provided us with
Some of the best
some revelations
information.
that
And
we had
continue to.
continue to do so.
Yeah.
So now that we've given you a little overview of who these people are and what the Black Orchid Society is, let's take a look at some of the things that we've picked up along the way.
There's a little more Black Orchid Society. There's the card again, and a business card with a logo stolen from General Electric, I think. Live Better Electrically.
You'll notice the plaza as the address for the
Yes.
society. These were some flyers
For
that
the band Cinderella Backstreet, a Black Orchid production. The next slide. Here's a couple Rocket from the Tombs related things. There's the masthead from the fanzine with the plaza address and the Black Orchid Society. The fact sheet with Rocket from the Tombs has a whole bunch of stuff in it. It mentions a demo tape produced by C.W. Bell for Black Orchid Energies.
that would be Craig Bell sitting right there.
And down below, again, Black Orchid Society is the address. Black Orchid Music is the music publisher. This Sleeper of the Month is a review of television's first single that Peter wrote for Cream magazine. And again, gives us a contact address at the bottom that it's being distributed by the Black Orchid Society.
So again, what are we saving?
Tapes.
Generally, we are always looking for and saving recorded matter,
Yeah.
tapes of all forms, printed matter, of course. We have a number of writings, a number of letters.
And we'll just get into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to say that Peter's career was one of the things that's kind of an advantage for us trying to archive all this stuff is that Peter's career was, because he died so young, was very short. His professional career really was from about 71 to 77. That's 6 years. If you add in the time from his first band, it's like 12 years. And it was also very limited in space. Basically, if you draw a line, say, from Sandusky to Akron to Youngstown and north, all of his gigs appeared within that area, except for one show, a Gay Activist Alliance dance at the Ohio State University Union in May of '73, and a Perubu appearance at Max's Kansas City in New York City.
By the way, that May
And a few
73
informal
appearance here in
recordings.
Columbus is something that we know of, but we've been very difficult for us to
It's
document.
documented in Charlotte's notes, and there's a letter from the union complaining that he performed that gig, but the Ohio State University paper really, it mentions the conference. It was a statewide conference of the Gay Activist Alliance, but it does not mention Cinderella Backstreet playing there.
We have finally, Albert Dennis, Cinderella Backstreet, remembers that gig because he said John Morton of the Electric Fields, who at the time was living in Columbus, attended the gig and then said, yeah, he served us all tea after the show. That's, but hey.
Charlotte noted that the electric fields were there. Go ahead next.
Here's an example of some of the tapes.